The cocktail glass slipped from my fingers. Not dramatically, there was no crash, no shattering against marble. My boss's fingers caught it before it fell, his reflexes sharper than mine would ever be, and he set it down with deliberate care on the mahogany bar. "You're not listening," Marco Rossini said. I hadn't been. The private lounge at the Bellissimo Hotel was suffocating me. Too many men in expensive suits, too much cigar smoke, too many eyes that didn't quite look at my face. I'd been hired 3 weeks ago as a server for his private events. No experience required, no background check, just a pretty face and the ability to move silently between dangerous men without asking questions. I'd managed that much until tonight. "I apologize, sir," I said quietly, reaching for the glass to refill it, but his hand closed around my wrist. Not hard, controlled. That was somehow worse. Marco Rossini was not a conventionally handsome man. He was probably in his late 30s, with sharp Sicilian features, dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything about a person in a single glance. He wore tailored black, always black, and he moved like someone who'd never had to raise his voice in his entire life because people simply obeyed. "I said you're not listening," he repeated, and there was an edge to his voice, now the kind of edge that made the other men in the room suddenly very interested in their drinks. "I asked you a direct question, and you looked away." My heart was hammering. I hadn't realized he'd asked me anything beyond a drink request. "What was the question?" I whispered. His thumb brushed the inside of my wrist once, deliberately. "Would you bring me the cigar box from the office?" Such a simple request. Such a normal errand. But something in the way he'd asked, it felt like a test. Like a command disguised as a question. And something in me, something stubborn and stupid and entirely self-destructive, decided I'd had enough of being invisible, silent, and obedient. "I'm not supposed to leave the lounge," I said, meeting his eyes for the first time that evening. That was part of my instructions. The room went absolutely still. His grip on my wrist didn't tighten, but it didn't release either. His dark eyes held mine, and I watched something flicker across his face, surprise, maybe, or amusement. I couldn't tell. I'd never been good at reading powerful men. "You're refusing," he said quietly. "It wasn't a question. I'm saying I was told not to," I corrected, my voice shaking slightly. "By your security team. So I can't." For a moment, just a moment, his expression softened, like he was seeing me for the first time, like I'd said something interesting. Then he released my wrist and leaned back against the bar, his gaze never leaving my face. "What's your name?" "Isabel," I said. "Isabel Moretti." He smiled then. It was a slow, dangerous smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of a predator who'd just found something that interested him. "Isabel Moretti," he repeated, tasting my name like wine. "You're new. You don't know who I am, do you?" I did, actually. Everyone in the city knew who Marco Rossini was. He was old money and organized crime wrapped in the same three-piece suit. He was power. He was danger. He was the kind of man whose name appeared in whispered conversations and disappeared from newspapers when lawyers demanded it. But I shook my head anyway. It felt safer to lie. "No, sir." He set his drink down and straightened his cuffs, a gesture of absolute composure. "Pity. It would be more entertaining if you did." He turned to the man beside him, one of his lieutenants I'd learned to recognize. Without looking at me, he said, "Get her." "Sir?" The lieutenant looked confused. "Find her tomorrow. Bring her to me." My blood went cold. "I'm sorry. I don't understand." I started, but Marco had already turned away, already dismissed me with the casual finality of a man who never had to explain himself. The other men in the room exchanged glances. No one spoke. I stood there, still holding the empty pitcher, my hands beginning to shake. One of the servers, a woman named Rosa who'd trained me, appeared at my elbow and gently took the pitcher from me. "Come on," she whispered, pulling me toward the back of the lounge. "You need to leave. Now." "What does he want?" I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I'd ever heard it. "What did he mean? Bring her." Rosa's face was pale. "It means whatever he decides it means. Get your coat. Go home. Don't come back tomorrow," he said. I know what he said. Rosa was already moving me through the service corridor toward the employee exit. "And you made a mistake tonight, Tesoro. A very dangerous mistake." "I just refused to leave the lounge," I protested weakly. "I was following protocol." "You refused him." Rosa pushed me toward the door. "No one refuses Marco Rossini. No one argues with him. And no one, especially not someone pretty and young and completely alone in this city, says no to him twice." The night air hit my face like a slap. I stood in the back alley of the Bellissimo, my white server's blouse still pristine, my black apron still tied at my waist, and I felt the first real flutter of terror in my chest. He'd smiled when I refused him. That was the part that wouldn't leave my mind as I walked toward the street. Not anger, not rage. A smile. Like he'd just decided something about me. Like he'd just begun a game he intended to win. The October wind carried the smell of the city car exhaust and distant rain, and the particular perfume of old money and older sins. And somewhere in that darkness, in one of the penthouses or estates or private clubs that dotted this city, Marco Rossini was likely still thinking about the girl who'd refused him. My phone buzzed as I reached my apartment building. Unknown number. The message was simple. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m. The Rossini estate. Come alone, or I'll send someone to bring you." I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the delete button. Then I went inside and lay awake until dawn. The Rossini estate sprawled across 20 acres of manicured grounds on the hills above the city. I'd driven past it once, before I understood what it was, a mansion that looked like it had been lifted from another century. All wrought iron and dark stone and windows that revealed nothing. Now I was driving toward it intentionally, and every mile felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff. I'd spent the entire day oscillating between calling the police and simply leaving the city. Rosa had texted me once. "Don't go." My roommate had suggested calling in a restraining order, which was hilarious in its naivete. Marco Rossini didn't have restraining orders filed against him. He had bodies buried. But at 7:45 p.m., I was in my car anyway, driving toward a mansion owned by a man I barely knew, to participate in something. Servitude. Threats. A power play I didn't understand. I'd dressed carefully, black trousers, a cream silk blouse, my best coat. Not trying to be attractive, exactly, but not trying to be invisible either. Some strange part of me understood that showing up in rags or attempting to look plain would be a kind of further refusal. And I'd already learned that refusal had consequences. The gates were already open. The driveway wound through landscaped darkness. And then the mansion materialized, all lit up like a Gothic palace, every window blazing with warm light. There were 3 cars parked in the circular drive, all sleek and expensive. A man in a dark suit emerged from the shadows before I'd even turned off my engine. "Miss Moretti?" "Yes. Mr. Rossini is expecting you. Come this way." He didn't touch me, but his presence at my back as we climbed the marble steps felt like a hand pushing me forward. The entrance hall was vast and cold, all cream marble and dark oil paintings of men who looked like Marco ancestors, probably, with the same sharp eyes and dangerous mouths. "Wait," the man said, stopping me in the center of the hall. He spoke into a small earpiece. "She's here." The pause that followed felt like forever. "Second floor, east wing. End of the corridor," he finally said, gesturing me toward an ornate staircase. I climbed slowly, my footsteps echoing. The hallway upstairs was lined with doors all closed, all mysterious. But the end of the corridor glowed with light, a single door left deliberately open. My hand shook as I pushed it wider. Marco's private study was smaller than I expected, intimate, even. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace with real flames, leather furniture that probably cost more than my car, and Marco himself, standing by the window in his customary black, a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk beside him. He didn't turn around immediately. "Close the door," he said quietly. I did, my fingers catching on the handle as I pulled it shut. The click of the lock was unmistakable. Now he turned, and the way his eyes found me, assessed me, made my skin prickle. "You came," he said, "not a question. You said you'd send someone if I didn't. I would have." He moved toward a leather chair and sat down, not inviting me to do the same. "Sit, Isabel." I sat across from him, leaving as much distance as the furniture allowed. This was impossible. This was a nightmare I'd wake from. This was the moment my life changed into something darker. "You've caused me a problem," he began, folding his hands across his stomach in a pose of absolute ease. "Last night, you refused me. In front of my men. In front of rivals who were watching for any sign of weakness." "I didn't refuse you," I whispered. "I said I couldn't leave. You said no. To me." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you understand what that means?" I shook my head. "It means that the men in this city who fear me have to wonder if my authority is slipping. It means I have to prove it isn't. And it means you have to make a choice." He stood and moved to the fireplace, gazing into the flames. "You can't go back to the Bellissimo. That life is finished. Your former employer has already been informed that you're unavailable." He paused, letting that sink in. My job, my income, my independence, all severed with a single word. "You can't leave this city. You don't have the resources. And besides, I'd simply bring you back. You can't go to the police. They work for me, or they work for men I own, which amounts to the same thing." My chest was tightening, breathing becoming difficult. "What do you want?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. He turned back to face me, and the firelight caught his features in a way that made him look almost cruel. "I want to know why you said no," he said. "No one ever says no. They don't know how. But you looked at me and simply refused. Like you didn't know what I could do, what I could take from you." "I don't want anything from you," I said quietly. "I just wanted to follow the rules I was given." "Rules." He smiled again, that dangerous smile. "Rules from my security team. Rules written by people I employ. And you chose those rules over my direct request." He sat back down, studying me. "You either don't know what I am, or you don't care. Which is it?" I met his eyes, and something in me, that stupid, defiant part that had gotten me into this, spoke truthfully. "I know what you are. I was scared, and when I'm scared, I freeze. So I said no because saying nothing would have been worse." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he stood and walked to the window, his back to me again. "You'll stay here," he said. "For now. There's a guest room prepared. You'll have access to anything you need. When I require something from you, I'll tell you, and you'll do it. Do you understand? Am I a prisoner? You're a guest," he said, and there was something almost gentle in his tone. "A guest who isn't free to leave. A subtle distinction, I know. For how long? That depends on you." I stood on trembling legs. "On what?" He turned back to me, and I saw something in his expression that made my breath catch. Not cruelty, not rage. Something far more dangerous: interest. The focused, absolute interest of a man who decided to own something. "On whether I can trust you not to refuse me again," he said quietly. "On whether you learn. And on whether this fascination I feel looking at you transforms into something worth keeping. I don't understand." "I know." He gestured toward the door. "My housekeeper will show you to your room. Don't try to leave. Don't try to contact anyone. If you do, I'll be forced to ensure you can't leave this house again. Do you understand?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. As I reached the door, he said my name. Just my name, Isabel. But there was something in his voice that made me pause. "You're going to wish you'd said yes last night," he said softly. "But perhaps it's better this way. At least now I know you're capable of surprising me." I left the study with my heart racing, and the terrible feeling that he'd just decided something profound about my future. And worse, some hidden part of me, the part that registered the intensity in his eyes, the control in his voice, the way he looked at me like I mattered, was already beginning to surrender. The guest room was larger than my entire apartment, with tall windows facing the garden, and a bathroom that had heated towel racks, and a bathtub that looked like it could fit 3 people. It was gorgeous and suffocating in equal measure. I didn't sleep the first night. The morning came gray and quiet, and I woke to a soft knock. A woman the housekeeper Marco had mentioned brought breakfast on a silver tray. She was older, severe, with eyes that had seen too much to be easily shocked. "Mr. Rossini wants you downstairs at 10, she said, setting the tray on the writing desk. "Formal clothes. There's a wardrobe in the closet." "What does he want?" I asked. She didn't answer. Just left me alone with my uneaten breakfast and the growing dread in my stomach. The wardrobe in the closet contained only 3 outfits, each more expensive than anything I'd ever owned. I chose a forest green dress, simple and elegant, and went downstairs with my hands trembling. Marco was in what appeared to be a study different from the one last night. This one more of an office with a large desk, covered in papers, and a wall of monitors showing various parts of the estate and the city beyond. He was on the phone in Italian, his voice sharp with authority, and he finished the conversation without saying goodbye. "You slept well?" he asked, not looking up from the papers. "Not well," I admitted. "No." He finally looked at me, and I saw something different in his expression this morning. Exhaustion, maybe. Neither did I. Before I could respond, there was a commotion outside. Shouting, the sound of running, something crashing. Marco's entire body went rigid. He moved to the monitors and I followed, watching as scenes from the front gate flickered across the screens. Men in dark clothes were scaling the fence, and Marco's security team was moving to intercept them. And there was genuine violence, not the kind that happened in movies, but the real kind that ended with men on the ground not moving. "Come," Marco said, taking my wrist and pulling me toward the back of the house. "Quickly." "What's happening?" I demanded. "Rivals. They've been looking for an opening." He moved through corridors I'd never seen, down a staircase, into what looked like a panic room, steel walls and a heavy door. "In here." "What are you?" "Getting you safe," he said flatly. He seated me on a chair bolted to the floor and moved to a panel with monitors. "Stay here. Don't leave this room no matter what you hear." "Where are you going?" He was already at the door, and when he turned back, I saw something in his face that made me realize I'd only been seeing a fraction of who Marco Rossini was. The controlled, dangerous man I'd met was a performance. This, the raw fury, the cold precision, was the reality. "To remind them why they fear me," he said. The door sealed behind him, and I was alone with the monitors and the sounds of violence filtering through the walls. I watched the screens in horror as it unfolded. Marco didn't appear on camera much, but when he did, he moved with a kind of brutal grace. He wasn't trying to kill anyone, he was making a statement, breaking bones, destroying bodies, making certain that anyone who survived would carry the message. This territory was his. This house was his. And attacking it had consequences. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the tears on my face. The violence lasted maybe 15 minutes. Then it was over. Marco reappeared on one of the outside cameras, his pristine black suit jacket torn at the shoulder, blood on his white cufflink. His blood or someone else's, I couldn't tell, and he was absolutely still the way a predator goes still after the kill. The door to the panic room opened, and he stepped inside, his dark eyes finding me immediately. He looked feral, dangerous, and utterly, completely lethal. "Are you hurt?" I asked. He seemed surprised by the question. "No." "Did you?" I couldn't finish. "Kill anyone?" "Yes." 2 of them were already unconscious, so it felt wasteful, but they'd tried to breach my home. He was already pulling off his ruined jacket, revealing the white shirt underneath and the muscled body beneath that. There was a cut along his ribs, bleeding slowly. "I don't tolerate that." "Let me help," I whispered, and I don't know where the impulse came from. Survival, maybe, or something more dangerous. He went very still as I approached him, my hands reaching for his shirt. He could have stopped me. He could have turned me away. Instead, he stood motionless, while I carefully unbuttoned his shirt and examined the wound. "It's not deep," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "Do you have first aid supplies?" "Bathroom, next door." I cleaned his wound with shaking fingers, pressing a cloth to the blood, feeling the heat of his skin and the hard muscle beneath. This close, I could smell him gunpowder and expensive cologne, and something dark underneath that I couldn't name. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. I didn't look up. "Because you're hurt. I'm also the man who took your freedom." "Yes," I said. "But you also protected me just now. You could have let them take me. You could have used me as a bargaining chip. But you didn't." His hand came up and covered mine against his ribs, holding it there, and I felt his heart beating beneath my palm, fast, violent, alive. "You're going to be dangerous to me," he said softly. Do you understand that? You're going to matter to me, and that makes me vulnerable, and I don't accept vulnerability. I finally looked up at his face, and the intensity of his gaze nearly stopped my breathing. I'm not dangerous, I whispered. I'm the opposite of dangerous. Exactly, he said. That's precisely what makes you so dangerous. His other hand came up to my face, his thumb brushing my cheek, and I felt the moment shift between us, not becoming safe, becoming something else entirely. A different kind of danger. The kind that came from wanting and needing and being unable to stop. When this is over, he said, when the dust settles and you're truly mine, I'm going to keep you in ways that have nothing to do with captivity. Do you understand that? I shook my head, and he smiled sadly. You will, he said. Soon. 3 days. That's how long Marco kept me in the house after the attack. The rules became clearer as time passed. I had access to the library, the gardens, the sitting rooms. I had access to him. In limited ways, dinners in the formal room where we ate in silence that somehow felt intimate. Mornings in the study where I read while he worked, passing the occasional document that required his signature. What I didn't have access to was information. When I asked about the attack, he changed the subject. When I asked about his business, he looked at me like I was a child asking about grown-up things. When I asked if I could call my roommate to tell her I was alive, he simply said no. She thinks I'm dead, I said, one afternoon, frustration breaking through my careful obedience. She's probably called the police. She's probably worried, Marco corrected, not looking up from his laptop. But she won't call the police. I've had her visited by men who explain the situation. She understands that any involvement from law enforcement will hurt you far more than it helps. The casual cruelty of that took my breath away. You threatened her. I explained reality to her, he said. There's a difference. Is there? I asked. He finally looked at me, and his expression was unreadable. Yes, he said. There is. Threats are made by people who lack power. I simply informed her of the consequences of certain actions. She's free to do as she likes, she'll simply have to accept what comes next. I understood then, with a clarity that was almost sickening, the dimensions of the cage he'd built. It wasn't just walls around me. It was walls around everyone I'd ever known. Every exit carefully sealed. Every potential rescue route already blocked. You're going to keep me here forever, I said quietly. No. He closed his laptop. You're going to stay here because you'll choose to. Eventually. Never. He smiled, and it was sad and knowing all at once. You say that now. But you've already stopped being frightened of me. You're starting to understand the shape of this life. Soon, you'll understand its comforts. And then, perhaps most dangerously, you'll understand why I wanted you in the first place. That evening, there was a phone call. Marco took it in his office, his voice sharp in Italian, and when he emerged, his expression was changed darker, more urgent. We need to leave, he said. What? There's a business matter that requires my attention. An estate upstate. We'll be gone for a week. We? I said. I don't need to come. Yes, he said simply. You do. I'm not leaving you here alone. My enemies know about you now. Within hours, I was in a black car with tinted windows, Marco across from me, and 2 security personnel in the front. The drive took hours, through increasingly remote territory, until we reached a compound that was smaller than the main estate but somehow more intimidating, all heavy gates and visible security. Beaumont, Marco said. One of my residences. You'll stay in the private wing. You're not to wander. Another prison, I said bitterly. A sanctuary, he corrected. There's a difference. The private wing was luxurious, but it was undeniably separate. Separate bedroom, separate bathroom, separate sitting room, but a shared door to Marco's quarters. I understood what that meant without him having to say it aloud. I tried the door between our rooms. Locked. On the second night, I heard him moving on the other side. Music, something classical. Chopin maybe played softly. I found myself moving closer to the door, pressing my ear against it, and I realized that I was listening for him the way a compass needle finds north. The music stopped abruptly, and the door opened. You're awake, Marco said. You were playing music. Yes. I do that when I can't sleep. He leaned against the doorframe, and I saw that he was wearing just loose black pants, his chest bare, the wound from the attack nearly healed. "Are you well?" "No," I said, and the honesty of it surprised us both. "I'm trapped. I'm terrified. I don't know what you want from me beyond possessing me, and that's not enough reason to give my entire life away." He studied me in silence for a moment, then stepped back. "Come here," he said. I did, moving into his quarters. The room was all shadow and firelight, and it felt like stepping into his mind, dark, controlled, beautiful, in a way that was almost dangerous. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the bed. I sat, my back rigid, and he sat beside me, not close, but near enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Ask me something," he said, "something real." "Why me?" "Because you said no," he answered immediately. "Because in a world where everyone obeys, you refused. Because when I pulled you into danger, you didn't scream or beg. You asked if I was hurt. That doesn't make me special. No, it makes you mine." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't expect that to be enough for you yet. But I'm patient. I have a long time to make you understand. And if I never understand, then I'll have the pleasure of watching you try." He lay back against the pillows, and after a moment, I found myself lying back as well, my body inches from his. We didn't touch. We didn't have to. The proximity was itself an intimacy, a violation and a gift wrapped together. "Sleep," he said. "Tomorrow I want to show you something." The something turned out to be a revelation. Marco brought me to a room on the second floor that I hadn't seen before, smaller, more personal, lined with photographs and documents. And as I looked at them, I began to understand the shape of his life. A young man with laughing eyes. Marco, maybe 20 years younger, before the silver appeared in his hair. "My brother," Marco said quietly. "Luciano. He died 12 years ago." The photographs progressed through a timeline. Luciano growing older, Marco always beside him, their faces growing more similar, and also more different. Luciano's expression growing harder, more bitter, while Marco's became more controlled. "What happened?" I asked. "He wanted more than what our father gave him. More power, more prestige, more money. He wanted to move against our father, and I tried to stop him." Marco's voice was flat, emotionless. "I failed. He died trying to take our father's territory. And my father blamed me because I didn't stand beside him in the rebellion, or stand beside our father against the rebellion. I simply tried to keep both of them alive." "You couldn't," I said. "No," he agreed. "I couldn't." He turned to another wall, where ledgers and documents were framed. Business records, I realized. Legitimate business. Real estate, restaurants, hotels. After he died, I took over not because I wanted power, but because it was the only way to ensure his death meant something, to ensure our family survived. He gestured to the photographs. I made them legitimate, slowly, carefully, over years. This compound, the estate, I'm not holding them through violence anymore. I'm holding them through law and business, and the kind of power that doesn't require bodies. "Then why are there men with guns?" I asked. "Because old habits don't die, and old enemies don't forget. Because in this world, legitimacy is just another suit you wear over the darkness." He looked at me. "I brought you here because you asked me what I want from you. And the answer is complicated, but it begins with this. I want someone who isn't afraid of the darkness, but who can help me build in the light." "That's a fantasy," I said. "You can't have both." "No," he agreed. "But you can have as much of one as you can bear." Over the following days, something shifted between us. The proximity that had felt like imprisonment began to feel like choice. Marco kept me close. I ate meals with him, sat in his office while he worked, walked the grounds with security at a distance that felt almost respectful. He didn't try to touch me beyond what was absolutely necessary. He didn't try to seduce me. But he was present, and that presence was its own kind of seduction. On the 5th day at Beaumont, there was an attack not violent, but political. A rival family challenged his claim on one of his legitimate properties, a restaurant in the city. Marco left early that morning, and I remained at the compound with explicit instructions not to leave the private wing. I lasted exactly 2 hours. The library was calling to me real books, not the carefully curated selection in my room, and I crept out into the main house like a prisoner testing her chains. The hall was quiet. The security personnel focused on the gates and gardens. I found the library without difficulty, and I lost myself in the stacks. That's where he found me. I didn't hear him come in. I was deep in a novel, curled in a leather chair, and suddenly Marco was there, still in his business suit, and his expression was unreadable. "You left your wing," he said. I didn't try to deny it. "You were gone. I was lonely." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe satisfaction. "Are you challenging me?" "No," I said. "I'm just existing. In your house, in the spaces you've given me." He closed the distance between us, and I had to crane my neck to meet his eyes as he stood over my chair. "If I allowed you to roam freely, would you leave?" he asked. "Yes," I said honestly. "And if I asked you not to?" "I don't know." He was quiet, processing this. Then he reached down and offered me his hand. I took it and let him pull me up. "Come," he said. "There's something I want to show you." He led me to a room I hadn't seen, a study with a desk and a leather chair, and on the desk, stacks of documents. My hand went to my mouth as I realized what they were. "Your university records," Marco said. "Your medical history, your childhood photographs, everything about you. You had me investigated," I whispered. "Of course." He settled into the chair and pulled me down into his lap with a kind of casual dominance that made my breath catch. "I investigate everything that matters to me." "What did you find?" I asked, barely able to speak. "That you were lonely before you met me. That you came to this city to start over and had made almost no friends in 3 months. That you have a kind heart, you volunteer at an animal shelter. You give money to homeless people despite having very little. That you read constantly. That you're drawn to stories about people who escape." I turned my head away from him. "You've read my journals." "Yes," he said, not bothering to apologize. "I know you better than you know yourself, Isabel. I know that you're stronger than you believe. I know that you're not nearly as innocent as you pretend to be. And I know that you're afraid of me, not because I've hurt you, but because you're beginning to want me to." "That's not true. Your pulse is racing," he said, his hand settling over my heart. "Your breathing has changed. You came out of your wing not because you were lonely, but because you were hoping to find me." I didn't answer, but he was right. He was absolutely right, and the realization was terrifying. "Tell me the truth," he said quietly. "Do you want to leave?" I sat in silence, my heart hammering beneath his palm, and I understood that this was the moment, the real threshold he'd been waiting for. "No," I whispered finally. "I don't think I do." His arms came around me, pulling me back against his chest, and we sat like that in the darkness of his study, my defenses crumbling, my resistance transforming into something far more dangerous: surrender. The thing about surrender is that it happens slowly, then all at once. Over the next week, Marco gave me access to the entire estate. The restrictions, gradually, were lifted. I could walk in the gardens without an escort. I could use the phone to call my roommate, brief conversations, monitored, but real contact. I could choose my own meals, my own clothes, my own time. The cage was becoming a kingdom, and I was becoming the queen of it. But with freedom came something more terrifying than captivity: the knowledge of my own choice. I could leave. He no longer prevented it, but I stayed, and that meant something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. One evening, Marco came to find me in the library, and he looked different, tired in a way that spoke to something beyond physical exhaustion. "Sit with me," he said, and I followed him to the sitting room with the fireplace. We settled on opposite ends of a leather sofa, but the distance between us felt charged, electric. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer with complete honesty." "Okay," I said carefully. "Do you hate me?" The question caught me off guard. "No." "Do you fear me?" "Yes," I admitted, "but not in the way I did." "In what way, then?" I took a breath, trying to find words for something I didn't fully understand. "I fear what I feel when I'm near you. I fear that I'm becoming attached to something I shouldn't be attached to. I fear that one day you'll realize I'm not what you thought I was, and you'll—" I couldn't finish. "I'll what?" he pressed gently. "Discard me." The way you're capable of discarding anything. He shifted closer on the sofa, but he didn't touch me. I want to tell you something, he said. When I first saw you at the Bellissimo, I thought you were beautiful. When you refused me, I thought you were interesting. But when you were in that panic room, watching me on the monitors, and you cried, do you know what I realized? I shook my head. I realized that I would burn down this entire empire, every legitimate business, every territory, every alliance. I would burn it all to ash if it meant keeping you safe. And that terrified me far more than any rival family ever could. My heart was trembling in my chest. You don't have to say that, I whispered. I know, he said. I'm saying it anyway. He stood and walked to the fireplace, his back to me, and I saw the tension in his shoulders, the effort it took for him to admit vulnerability. I've been alone my entire life, he continued. In a house full of people, in an organization of thousands, I've been completely alone. My brother needed me, so I was strong for him. My father needed me, so I was ruthless for him. My men needed me, so I was untouchable for them. But no one ever just needed me, as a person, as a man. He turned back to face me, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before, fear, naked and real. You do, he said. And it's breaking every rule I've built my life on. I stood on legs that felt unsteady, and I walked to him. Up close, I could see the silver in his dark eyes, the lines of tension around his mouth, the power and the vulnerability warring in his face. I don't know how to do this, I said quietly. Whatever this is, I've never wanted anyone the way I'm starting to want you. I know, he said, and it terrifies you. Yes, I admitted. His hand came up and cupped my face, his thumb brushing my cheekbone with infinite gentleness. Then let me be terrified for both of us, he said. Just for now, just until you're ready. The kiss came after a moment of perfect stillness, not from him, but from me. I reached up and pulled his mouth to mine, and it was nothing like I expected. It was soft, almost cautious, like he was asking a question and waiting for my answer. The answer was yes. When we broke apart, I couldn't quite meet his eyes. Not yet, he whispered. I know, but soon? I nodded against his chest, hearing his heartbeat racing, feeling like I'd just made a decision that would reshape the entire landscape of my life. He held me through the evening, both of us, afraid to move, afraid to change the fragile balance we'd found. And somewhere in that holding, in the silence between us, something irreversible happened. I stopped being his captive. I became his choice. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was clear. The next, rain was battering the windows of Beaumont like a living thing trying to break through. We were in Marco's private quarters, sitting on opposite sides of a chessboard, when the power cut out. The entire estate plunged into darkness. And before I could process what was happening, Marco was moving, checking his phone, speaking in rapid Italian into it, ensuring that the backup generators were running. It's just the main power grid, he said, settling back beside me as the emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in a shadowy amber glow. Nothing to worry about. But the storm had trapped us in a way that nothing else had. The roads would be impassable. No one could reach the estate, and the isolation felt like fate. Are you frightened? He asked. No, I said, and it was true. For the first time since being brought here, I wasn't afraid. Good. He stood and offered me his hand, and I took it without hesitation. He led me through the estate to the master bedroom, his bedroom, vast and dark and somehow intimate, even in its size. Outside, the rain was deafening. The world beyond the windows dissolved into chaos. Inside, there was only us. I don't expect anything, he said, his voice low. I simply want you near me tonight, in case you need me, in case I need you. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We undressed without ceremony, not with passion, but with something deeper, a kind of acceptance. His body was scarred, marked by a life lived in violence, and I traced some of those marks with my fingertips. Asking wordless questions, he answered without words. When we lay down together, he didn't try to seduce me. He simply held me, his body curved around mine, and I felt the thundering of his heart against my back, the evidence of his need, his vulnerability, his fear that I might disappear. Tell me if you want to stop, he whispered. Okay, I said. We lay like that for hours, and the storm raged outside, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the need between us shifted. It became less about restraint and more about inevitability. His hand moved from where it was safely around my waist to my ribs, and I felt my breath hitch. His lips found the curve of my shoulder, and I turned toward him almost without meaning to, drawn like gravity itself had changed. Isabel, he whispered, like my name was a question. Yes, I answered, not even sure what I was answering to. He moved slowly, so slowly that every moment felt stretched and eternal. His mouth found mine, and this kiss was different from the first, less cautious, more knowing, but still restrained, still waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. My hands found his shoulders, the scarred skin, the hard muscle beneath, and I realized I was trembling, not from fear, but from the overwhelming intensity of finally touching him, finally being touched, finally crossing the threshold that I'd been standing on since the moment he'd smiled at my refusal. You're shaking, he murmured against my lips. I know, I whispered. I know, he said. I have your history, and I know what that means. His hand moved to my waist, settling there, warm and heavy and absolute. We can wait. We can wait as long as... No, I said, and I was surprised by the certainty in my voice. I don't want to wait. He pulled back slightly, his dark eyes searching my face in the amber glow. Are you certain? No, I admitted, but I want to be certain. I want to know what it feels like to be yours. You already are, he said. But I want you to understand that this changes everything. This is not captivity anymore, Isabel. This is a binding. This is a choice that will have consequences. I understand. And I did. I understood that the moment his body became one with mine, something irreversible would happen, that I would be transformed into something new, something tied to him in a way that went beyond proximity or threat. He moved slowly, so carefully, and I felt the first moment of real pain give way to something else entirely, a feeling of completeness, of finding a part of myself I didn't know was missing. My gasp of surprise turned into something that sounded like his name. Breathe, he whispered. Just breathe and stay with me. And I did. We moved together slowly, gently, the storm providing a soundtrack of fury and chaos that somehow made the intimacy between us feel more profound. I felt every moment of it, his restraint, his protectiveness, the way he was holding back his own need to ensure I was safe. It built slowly, this sensation that had nothing to do with passion in the way I'd read about it in books, and everything to do with a kind of rightness that felt almost spiritual. When it crested, I felt tears on my face, and Marco pulled back just enough to see them. Am I hurting you? He demanded. No, I said, my voice breaking. No, I'm just... He kissed my tears away, murmuring things in Italian against my skin, his body still moving with careful control. And when I felt him reach his own limit, let go of his restraint, the sound he made raw and vulnerable and utterly real undid something essential in me. We lay still for a long time afterward, our bodies tangled together, the rain still raging against the windows. His hand was in my hair, his lips against my forehead, and I felt him breathing into my skin like he was trying to memorize me. I started, then stopped, unable to find words. I know, he said softly. For me too. What happens now? I asked. Now, he said, you understand that you're not my captive. You're not my prisoner. You're mine in the way that matters, the way you chose. I lifted my head and looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw the man beneath the power. The vulnerability beneath the control, the person who had been alone his entire life and was terrified of losing this, terrified of losing me. I'm afraid, I whispered. I know, he said. So am I. And we held each other through the rest of the storm, two damaged people finding shelter in each other, unaware that the real danger was still to come. The power came back 2 days later, along with news that made Marco's entire demeanor change. I was in the library when his men brought the information. I heard the hard tone in his voice through the closed door, the kind of Italian that sounded like broken glass, and I knew that something had fractured. He found me within the hour, and he looked like he had after the attack on the main estate. Feral, controlled, lethal. "We need to go back to the city," he said. "Now." "What happened?" I asked, standing from the window seat where I'd been reading. "Information," he said tersely. "There's a rival family making moves. They've targeted our interests, and—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "And they're looking for a way to pressure me. They know about you." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, they know about me?" "Exactly what I said. They know you exist. They know you matter to me, and they're planning to use that." The drive back to the city took 5 hours, and Marco spent most of it on the phone, his voice hard and methodical. I sat beside him in the car, and I could feel the shift happening. The man who had held me through the storm was transforming back into the ruthless businessman, the crime lord, the untouchable force. The city house was different when we arrived, more security, more men in dark suits, more of the infrastructure of power made visible. Marco's lieutenant, the same man from the Bellissimo, was waiting in the entrance hall. "The Carmichael family is making moves on 3 of our restaurants," he reported. "They're also claiming territory on the south side. And there's been—" He glanced at me, uncomfortable. "Interest in your personal situation." "Where?" Marco demanded. "They've stationed men at her apartment building, watching, waiting for opportunity." I felt Marco's hand clench on my shoulder. "She doesn't go anywhere," he said coldly. "Nowhere. Understood? If she steps 1 foot outside this house, I want to know about it." "Understood, sir." The evening unfolded with a formal dinner that was anything but formal. Men in expensive suits, dangerous eyes, conversations conducted in Italian that I couldn't follow. And all the while, Marco's hand remained on the small of my back, a declaration and a warning. It was near midnight when the call came. I heard the phone ring in Marco's office, heard him answer, and something in his tone shifted. The careful control cracked. He emerged from the office with such fury in his expression that everyone in the room went silent. "Get her," he said to his lieutenant. "Get her now." "Sir?" The man looked confused. "Her, the Carmichael daughter. She's at the Bellissimo. Bring her here, alive." "What's happening?" I demanded. But Marco wasn't looking at me. He spent the next 2 hours on a series of increasingly tense calls, his voice cutting like a blade through opposition. I gathered fragments, something about a statement being made, about the Carmichaels crossing a line, about a message that needed to be sent in a language they would understand. When his men brought the girl into the house, she was terrified. She couldn't have been more than 20, and she was shaking so badly she could barely stand. "Where?" Marco asked his lieutenant. "The upstairs guest room. She's secured." He nodded, and then he finally turned to me. "Come," he said. "What are you going to do?" I asked, though I already knew. I could see it in his face. "What needs to be done?" I followed him upstairs, my heart racing, and when he opened the door to the guest room, I saw the girl, beautiful, terrified, and completely at his mercy. "Tell me why I shouldn't end this situation right now," Marco said quietly. "Please," the girl whispered. "Please, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know anything. Your family attempted to make a move against my interests." Marco continued, his voice devoid of inflection. "They attempted to locate someone I care about. They were planning to use her against me. These are grave mistakes." The girl was crying now, and I felt something in me break. "Marco," I said, and his head turned toward me. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Whatever you're planning, don't." His expression was cold. "You have no authority here." "I know," I said. "But I'm asking you anyway." For a long moment, he didn't move. The girl sobbed silently, and then, without a word, he turned and left the room. I followed him downstairs, my hands shaking. "What are you going to do with her?" I demanded. "Keep her," he said, settling into his chair in the study. "Until her family understands the terms of engagement. You're going to hurt her. I'm going to ensure that she returns to her family with a very specific message." He looked at me with eyes like ice. "I'm going to ensure that no one ever again thinks they can move against me with impunity." "And what about me?" I asked quietly. "What about everything you said about burning it all down for me? About choosing light?" "That was before," he said. "That was in a moment of weakness. This is reality." The words felt like a blade in my chest. I understood then what I should have understood all along, that the man who had held me through the storm and the man who could coldly order violence were the same person, that his capacity for tenderness didn't erase his capacity for cruelty. "I want to see her," I said. "No, I want to see her," I repeated, and there was steel in my voice. "Right now." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps. He studied me for a long moment, then gestured toward the staircase. I went to the guest room, and when I opened the door, the girl looked at me with desperate hope. "Please," she said. "Please help me." I sat on the bed beside her, and I felt the weight of every choice that had brought me to this moment. Every surrender, every acceptance, every time I'd chosen to stay. "I'm going to help you," I whispered. "I don't know how yet, but I will." When I came back downstairs, Marco was waiting. "You're developing a conscience," he said, not unkindly. "Or I'm remembering that I have one," I replied. "That's not advisable," he said. "Not in this life." "Then maybe," I said quietly. "This life needs to change." The girl, her name was Sophia, was released after 3 days. Not because Marco changed his mind, but because her father capitulated completely. The message had been sent and received. The Carmichael family understood the terms, and so Sophia was driven to the edge of the Rossini territory with a sealed envelope and instructions to tell her father that any further moves would be met with permanent solutions. I watched her car disappear from an upstairs window, and I felt something shift in my chest. That evening, I didn't go to dinner. I stayed in my room, and when Marco came to find me, I was sitting on the bed with my hands folded in my lap. "You're sulking," he said. "I'm thinking," I replied. He sat beside me, maintaining distance, like we were strangers. "About what?" "About who I am," I said. "About who I'm becoming. About whether I can stay with someone who does the things you do." "And?" he asked quietly. "And I don't know," I said. "I love you. I'm terrified of that, but it's true. But I also can't live in a world where that love means accepting violence as a tool, accepting captivity as protection, accepting that the ends justify the means." He was silent for a long time. "What are you asking me to do?" he finally said. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm asking you to be different. But I know you can't be different. Not completely. Not in this world. So maybe I'm just asking you to acknowledge the cost. To acknowledge that love and cruelty can't coexist. To choose which one you want to be." "If I choose light," he said slowly, "I lose power. I lose territory. I lose everything I've built." "No," I said. "You lose the parts of it that are built on violence. You keep the business, the legitimacy, the life, but you build it different. You build it in a way that doesn't require me to close my eyes to atrocities." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "There's a man named Francesca," he said. "Runs the Southside operations. He's been pushing for territory expansion. Violent expansion. My old way would have been to make him disappear, to eliminate the problem." "And the new way?" I asked. "The new way is to offer him a choice. Partnership or retirement. Power shared or power ceded. No blood required." He turned back to face me. "The issue is that I'm not sure I know how to do that. I'm not sure I trust a method that doesn't rely on fear." "Maybe that's where you start," I said. "With figuring out if you trust anything else." He came back to the bed and sat, and this time he took my hand. "If I do this," he said, "if I try to transform what I've built into something that relies less on violence and more on legitimacy, it will take time. Years, probably. And there will be people who see it as weakness and try to exploit it." "I know," I said. "And you'll stay? Even when it's difficult? Even when you realize the cost?" "Yes," I said. "But not as a prisoner. As a choice. As a partner. As someone whose opinion matters. That terrifies me more than any rival family," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm asking for it." Over the following weeks, Marco began the process of transformation. Not by eliminating violence entirely, that was impossible in his world, but by changing what violence was for. No longer a tool of expansion, but a shield of protection. No longer an instrument of power, but a last resort. He met with Francesca, and instead of a bullet, he offered a partnership. Instead of force, he offered opportunity. And surprisingly, it worked. The South Side operations were restructured. The violent takeovers were replaced with business negotiations. The fear-based empire began, slowly, to transform into something that more closely resembled legitimacy. And I remained at the city house, not as a captive, but as something else entirely. A counselor, a lover, a witness to his transformation. One evening, nearly 2 months after Sophia's release, Marco found me in the library reading, as I so often was, and he seemed different, lighter, somehow, less burdened. "I want to show you something," he said. He led me downstairs to his office, where a document lay on the desk. I recognized the format immediately, a business registration. A legitimate enterprise. "I'm transferring 40% of my assets to legitimate operations," he said. "Legal restaurants, hotels, real estate development. Over the next 5 years, that percentage will increase to 70. "What about the rest?" I asked. "The rest will be managed carefully, quietly, by people who understand that my priorities have changed. My empire," he said, looking at me directly, "is no longer my priority. You are." "Don't say that," I said quietly. "Don't make me the reason. If you're going to change, it has to be for you, because you decided it was right." "It is right," he said, "and it is because of you. Both things are true." He pulled me close, and I let myself lean into him, feeling the familiar solidness of his presence. "I'm still going to be dangerous," he warned. "I'm still going to protect what's mine with everything I have." "I know," I said. "I'm asking you to be dangerous in the right ways. I'm asking you to be ruthless in defense, not in expansion. I'm asking you to be human, not just a force of nature." "That's asking a lot," he said. "Yes," I agreed, "but I think you can do it." And in his arms, in the city house that had become my home, I realized that I had made a choice. Not the choice to surrender to him, but the choice to build something with him. Something that was neither innocent nor entirely dark, but something in between. A life that acknowledged both his nature and my values. A love that was real, precisely because it was difficult. 6 months later, Marco and I stood in a garden at dusk, watching the light fade from the sky. The transformation had been incomplete, it always would be. Violence still happened, just less frequently. Enemies still existed, just fewer of them. But the skeleton of the empire had shifted, gradually, toward legitimacy. And there, in the garden of the main estate, surrounded by roses and the sound of fountains, Marco had brought me to ask the question I'd been waiting for. "Isabel," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands as he opened a small box. "I'm going to ask you something that I have no right to expect you to want." The ring was simple, a diamond set in white gold, nothing ostentatious. It looked like something I would have chosen myself. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Knowing what I am, knowing what I was, knowing that I will never be entirely clean, but that I'm trying to be better. Knowing that this will bind you to a life that's never going to be simple or safe or entirely good. Will you stay anyway?" I thought about the girl in the cocktail lounge who had refused to leave her post. I thought about the terror of the early days in this house. I thought about the storm and the intimacy of vulnerability. I thought about standing in his office and asking him to choose a different path. And I thought about who I had become, not the innocent girl who had said no, but not entirely the woman he'd tried to make me. Something in between. Someone who had learned to live with complexity and compromise, with the knowledge that love and morality could exist in tension without resolving into simplicity. "Yes," I said. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and I felt the weight of it, not the weight of captivity, but the weight of choice, of commitment, of accepting both the light and shadow of another person. The wedding, 2 months later, was a strange affair held at a private country club with only close friends and family present. Marco's men were there, though they remained discreet. A few of his legitimate business associates, curious about the mysterious woman who had captured the attention of one of the city's most powerful men. My roommate came, and we hugged with tears streaming down both our faces. She still didn't fully understand what had happened to me, but she understood that I was happy, and that was enough. The ceremony was brief, officiated by a judge with connections to Marco's organization. The vows were traditional, but when Marco spoke, his voice carried a weight that went beyond the words. "I promise to protect you. he said. To keep you safe. To cherish you. To build a life with you that honors both who you are and who I'm trying to become. I promise to be honest about the darkness in me, and I promise to continue to choose light, not because you're asking me to, but because you've shown me it's possible. And I, standing in a white dress that felt both foreign and right, promised to be his partner, to accept him with his shadows, to support his transformation without requiring perfection, to love him not despite his capacity for violence, but with the understanding that capacity was part of what made him capable of such profound protection. The reception was elegant and subdued. No excessive celebrations, no spectacle, just a gathering of people important to us, sharing a meal and acknowledging the binding of two lives. Late in the evening, Marco took my hand and led me to a quiet room. I have something for you, he said, handing me a folder. Inside were adoption papers, 7 of them. For children in state care, children I'd mentioned caring about, children whose futures had seemed uncertain. You can't fix everything, I said, looking up at him with tears in my eyes. No, he agreed, but I can fix this, for you, if you want to. You'll be a father? I asked quietly. To children? I'll try, he said. I'll fail sometimes, but I'll try. And that, I realized, was everything. Not perfection, not redemption, but the commitment to try, to choose differently, to be shaped by love, even as he maintained his capacity for danger. The reality of the following years was messier than the wedding suggested. There were setbacks. There were moments when Marco's darker impulses threatened to resurface. There was violence, less of it, but it still happened, and I learned to live with the knowledge of it without accepting it as inevitable. But there were also moments of profound beauty. There was watching him teach one of the children to build a bookshelf. There was hearing him read bedtime stories in a voice stripped of menace. There was watching him smile, genuinely smile, without calculation or threat behind it. And there was the knowledge, which I carried with me always, that he had chosen this life with me, not because I forced him to, but because I showed him it was possible. The empire didn't collapse. It evolved. The violent takeovers were replaced with strategic business acquisitions. The territory disputes were handled through negotiation, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, Marco Rossini transformed from a crime lord into a legitimate businessman, not without cost. There were people who saw his changed methods as weakness and tried to exploit them. Some succeeded in taking pieces of his territory. Others disappeared, though he never spoke of what happened to them, and I learned not to ask. But the violence was contained, the darkness was managed, and the man who had once pulled me into captivity had, through some strange alchemy of love and choice, become something that approximated redemption. Years later, sitting in our garden with our children playing nearby and Marco reading beside me, I thought about the girl I had been the one who had refused to serve a rude mafia boss. I thought about the moment he had smiled and demanded I be brought to him. I thought about the cage he had built, and the way I had learned to turn it into a home. It wasn't the fairy tale I might have imagined as a girl. It was darker, more complex, more difficult. It was real in a way that fairy tales could never be, and it was, despite everything, worth it. As if sensing my thoughts, Marco reached over and took my hand, and he smiled, not the dangerous smile of predator, but something softer, something that spoke of transformation and cost, and the difficult, beautiful work of building a life with someone who had been shaped by darkness but chose, every day, to step toward light. In the distance, the city glowed with evening light, and I felt the weight of my ring, the evidence of a choice I had made and continued to make, day after day. I had said no to a rude mafia boss, and he had brought me to him anyway. But in staying, I had transformed both of us, and that, I finally